Hi, everybody. We are here for the 61st Festival dei Popoli with a director, an American director of one of the films that we really loved as a programming committee. We went crazy for Bulletproof by Todd Chandler, the director that's here with us, because it's a film very engaging on many levels and very firm in the present, and it tells with the documentary as an instrument a tale of what's happening in America and in the current situation in particular of the schools of America, because we know that many tragic things happened in American schools, Columbine, Virginia Tech, etc. And Todd had the courage and the idea to go in American schools and see what happened after that in terms of security, defense, guns control, and particularly fear that something like that could happen again, and consequences of this between teachers and the children or the boys who attend to school and high schools. So it's a great film, and we loved it for the first glance, and we jumped on it. And so we are here to know more about it, doing a couple of questions to Todd. I like to start from the congratulations for the film in particular, and at the beginning I want to start when the idea came out, how came out the idea, and how many years did it take to do this particular work of research and talking with school institution and no more to make a great editing work like Bulletproof has.
Well, thank you. And first, I just want to thank you for all the kind words, and thank you to Festival dei Popoli. I'm so happy to be included in the festival this year. I think it's a fantastic festival, and it means a lot. So the admiration is mutual. And as for your first question, I'm a filmmaker. I'm also a teacher. I've been a teacher for almost 20 years. And for the last 5 years, I've been teaching at a university in Brooklyn, New York, Brooklyn College, where I live. And so the idea for the film started in around 2015. There was a school shooting on the West Coast of the United States, and I overheard some of my students talking about that. And I opened the class up for discussion, and it was an interesting discussion that was about sort of fear and violence. We are in a city, and in terms of mass shootings, the kinds of shootings that in part that the film is talking about, those don't tend to happen in American cities in the same way. And so my students were talking about that. They said, "Oh, this is a problem in white suburban areas mostly. In cities we have different issues in schools, policing in schools, and metal detectors." And they just sort of talked about racialized violence, and they talked about a range of things. None of them were surprised that another mass shooting had happened. And the conversation went on for a little while, and one of the students who was an international student who was visiting that year said, just remarked that this was such an American conversation. And I thought, oh, this really is an American conversation, and what is so American about it? And not just the sort of form of violence, but also the strategies that were being employed to prevent violence. And so I started slowly doing research and talking to people. I found that there were these school safety conventions, and one of which is in the film in Las Vegas. But I went to one far earlier in 2015, I believe, that was in Washington, D.C. I just went to research. And that was when I sort of had the real idea for the film, because I was in this space, a convention center, where people were selling all these products. And the products were like first aid kits and signs and fire extinguishers and smoke alarms, things that one might consider like everyday school safety. And also bulletproof desks and surveillance systems, metal detectors, this whole sort of other side of that, and that these things were all living together in one space, just made me think a lot about the sort of deeper culture of the United States and how we think about violence and think about safety and sort of look to certain kinds of solutions. And so at that point, I started filming. I filmed a little bit in another convention center. The first 2 years of filming, none of it actually made it in the film. So 2015 through 2017, just filming sort of by myself and with friends, and found access to one school in particular that was interesting to me, but it was all sort of tests. And then through that, we were able to get some support, some funding for the film. And then really from about late 2017 through 2019 was when we did the bulk of the filming. And there was a lot of research involved. I sort of thought about the landscape that I wanted to sort of map, even if it's an incomplete map, thinking about schools, thinking about industry, thinking about the sort of different approaches and how I wanted to, to sort of map this sort of landscape. So there were a lot of research, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and a lot of test shoots, going places, building relationships, thinking if this was the right thing, and then maybe it wasn't, but then finding something else and going that way. I had this very big visual map of concentric circles with all the sort of ideas that I was thinking about, that was informing the film, and then the sort of more practical things that we were filming, and then thinking about, there was a lot of thought that went into it, because the subject matter is so, people have very strong reactions and very strong opinions, and so I really wanted to think about a way to sort of make meaning of this situation without imposing an agenda. And so in part that was really carefully choosing where we were going to film and what sorts of things we were going to film and how we were going to film them.
Yeah. And quoting Edward Luttwak, that very popular also in Italy, not just in the United States, the best form of defense is a full-on attack. So probably also from this, I can think that ideas in America about how defending ourselves is quite different, and also the policy regarding guns, etc., from Italy. So for us, it's a kind of a surprising thing, because we see how the reaction of this teacher, and that's quite surprising. I'd like to know, maybe it isn't related with this, but I'd like to know what was the most surprising thing instead for you, beginning from your initial project and where it came on the way. Maybe you find something that was shocking for you in a way, or something that you didn't expect, like we have when we see your movie in many cases.
Sure. I mean, I think there are two things. The one thing was that I was surprised constantly throughout the film by sort of discovering my own assumptions, and then having those assumptions complicated by the people I was meeting and the things that I was seeing. Right. So I think it's easy to, have a set of assumptions about something, or to be fixed in an idea about what something might be. And for me, I really tried to be open to the process of talking with people, of learning from people, sometimes people who I may not agree with on a personal level, but to really sort of meet people where they were. And to me, it became very interesting, because it became less of a question. I think in the beginning I thought, oh, there's this whole industry, and I was very focused on this idea of industry, and I thought this industry that's emerged around violence in schools, and I'm interested in documenting that. And very quickly, again, I keep using this word complicate, but it became more complicated than that. And I thought I just kept encountering people who were trying to do the thing that they knew how to do to keep schools safe. And I could agree or disagree with the strategy, but invariably it was the intention was always to try to to achieve a certain kind of safety, and that was interesting to me because it felt like there's this, these sort of larger cultural issues in the United States, and those are things that are maybe harder to address. And so it was just sort of surprising to me to continually meet people who were struggling with these questions of safety and trying to do the best they could, but very much siloed from each other. So, like people in New York City not necessarily talking with people in Texas, and radically different approaches, but people sort of doing the best on their own terms. And that was interesting to me. And I think the other thing that became surprising is, again, when I started off, I thought I'm going to make a film about the sort of industry around school security. And it transformed. I was in Texas filming a parade. And it's in the film, and it's, students, they're cheerleaders, there are football players, there's a marching band, there are students who are dressed in military uniforms because they're in sort of a military training program. And there was this moment where I just really started thinking more. I thought, oh, this is not about industry, this is about culture, and this is almost like an ethnography in a way. And I started thinking more through an ethnographic lens. However, incomplete. I don't think that the film is necessarily an ethnography, but it does, in some ways, for me, I started thinking about rituals and looking at everything that I was seeing as a kind of ritual, and what can we learn about a culture by looking at its rituals. And so that was, I didn't expect that, and as that emerged, it really shaped both part of the production, but certainly the post-production process of really thinking about each of these things as kind of performances or rehearsals, and that somehow are these rituals to ward off violence or to sort of ward off fear somehow. And even not just the security-related things, but the parades and the practices and all of the things that the young people are doing. It's all of it lives in the same space, and that was both interesting and exciting to me.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, and I agree. I have the same impressions as a viewer. And talking instead about your method and your idea of documentary and your approach, making things a lot easier. We talked mainly about two fathers, living fathers of American documentary nowadays, talking about Frederick Wiseman for a kind of approach. Director invisible, he goes into a place, he absorbs what happened in the place and translates it in a film. Or the Aaron Morris approach, frontal, direct, I make you a question and I need an answer, and things go away with that. Your approach, I think, is another an original approach. Of course, you're not copying anybody. And in a way, there is a bit of maybe the Wiseman thing, but also a kind of more direct, but more not so direct approach. Like, for example, you are talking, the camera, the subject is talking to this teacher or who has the gun in the box, in the safe box. So it's a kind of a mixed bag, and the result is very original also for this. So what was this idea of approach, and maybe it was evolving during your work? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, and it was evolving. And I would say definitely Wiseman is an influence, in particular that Wiseman really looks at institutions and systems. And I think another filmmaker who is a really big influence is Harun Farokhi. And again, another filmmaker who is does a really good job at looking at systems. I was sort of less interested in thinking about individual stories, and looking at sort of how to map a system. And at the same time, like Wiseman, for example, I feel like is a purist. And for me, it was more about, like, there were some things that I took from that. I liked the sort of observational distance. But I also felt like, I really mostly went by instinct, thinking about what's the best thing in a particular situation. And when I was in a room with someone, if it made sense to talk with them, I talked with them. We never did a sort of lit, proper interview necessarily, but sometimes it just made sense to talk to people. And I didn't have a rule against that. I felt like, in this case, there's a toolbox and whatever the right tool for the job, without making the film sort of chaotic, but sort of being able to be flexible and a bit more wide ranging in approach than sort of just saying we're only going to do it this way.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, and please enjoy the vision of Bulletproof. That's a life-changing film.
And thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Emanuele, and thank you, Festival dei Popoli, for having me.